Iskandar speaking to us through a translator. He is a founder of two of Egypt's opposition parties. We thank you for your time, sir. It is a little bit past half past the hour. The curfew in Cairo, Alexandria and Suez has been in effect for a little bit over half an hour, and these are our live pictures from the Al Jazeera bureau in Cairo of, well, if you can see through the darkness, absolute chaos. In Cairo, the curfew is being roundly ignored. Police personnel carrier on fire on a bridge. Protesters attempting to push it into the Nile. The headquarters of the ruling NDP on fire. Absolutely astonishing scenes in Cairo, and the sound of gunfire, we don't know what it is, if it's live fire, rubber bullets, but those sound like very loud explosions. Yeah, Eamon, go ahead.
Yeah, Kamal, I'm actually standing on the balcony of our office. I can look down onto the street. Our camera angle cannot show it to you, but what we're seeing right on the street in front of us, you can hear the loud gunfire. By most accounts, that is ammunition. Now, we're not confirming that it is live fire, but certainly heavy gunfire coming in from the direction of the radio and television building towards the center of the city where we are. Every once in a while, we hear that gunfire. It's a tight alley that runs between us and the Hilton Hotel. At the very end of it is the Ministry of Information, as well as the radio and television building, an iconic building. There's going to be a lot of concern about that particular building because it is very heavily guarded. It is the center, the nerve center of the government messaging, at least programming through news and other cultural programs. That's a building that has been the center of a great deal of criticism. In of itself, it has seen a great deal of protests in front of it, because of the reason that I just mentioned. Every once in a while, if you will, or dispersed, if you will, by the police that is on the end of it. Now, having been in front of that building many times, the security services that stand in front of that building are oftentimes special forces. So they are very heavily armored vehicles, and that, it seems, from where we are standing, from the vantage point from where we are standing, it seems to be that the concentration of the people has focused on two various parts of the city. One includes the bridge that you're seeing, which was for several hours under the control of the police forces. That was completely overrun by the protesters, and in fact, as you saw there, they set that personnel carrier on fire. The other protest taking place off to the right of where we are, and unfortunately our camera cannot show it to you, is the protest that was outside the Ministry of Information and the radio and television building. Adjacent to it is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right, and it's on the Corniche, which is right on the Nile. So that is where we believe the clash is taking place right now. Unfortunately, it's a black cloud of smoke that is blowing our way.
Amy, just so you know, I'm getting reports here adding to the fires. A downtown Cairo police station has been set on fire and a police car outside. And apparently some gas tanks belonging to those police cars have exploded, which could account for some of the particularly loud explosions. Just some reports we are getting through, unconfirmed at this stage. Eamon, stick around. Coming back to you in a moment. On the line now, Rauya Rage in Alexandria, where I suspect, Rauya, the curfew is being ignored just as it is in Cairo.
Absolutely, Kamal. The people are still continuing with their protests. They're marching through the streets. Just in the past 1 minute, there was a group of teenagers, really not even 15-year-olds, parading the sign they've apparently brought down from the traffic department, the Alexandria traffic department, the main banner of the traffic department. They were parading it through the street, clapping and cheering. Meanwhile, we can also see other people who are clearly concerned about the curfew, doing everything they can to try to get home. Heart-wrenching scenes, really, of up to 30 people trying to get on pickup trucks in very dangerous conditions, really, as public transport microbuses also stopped, people pushing and shoving, trying to get onto these buses to get home. This as protests continue in the backdrop. So really a very interesting scene here in Alexandria.
Yeah, Rauya, we have been looking at some of the pictures you fed through from Alexandria earlier, just back on the live picture of Cairo. Very dramatic stuff there at the moment. Any sign at all of things, I won't use the phrase calming down because clearly it's not calm at all, but of it abating in any way, or could this just go on all night, do you feel?
Kamal, the one thing, not seeing any the heavy fire and smoke. I mean, I can still see smoke in the distance, and there's still dark clouds of the smoke, and we can identify that even though it's nighttime, we can identify that there's still some billowing further in the distance. But in the past, like 2 hours ago, it was pretty intense. There were fires everywhere. We could look around us. There was smoke. There was fire in a police station. Protesters set a police station very close to where we are on fire. Another, we're not hearing the loud thuds, the loud explosions of what we are pretty certain, fairly certain, were riot police trucks being set on fire and exploding, their gas tanks exploding. That we haven't been hearing in the past hour. It's more of just people marching on the streets. No sign, though, that they want to go home anytime soon.
And from Rawi Rage in Alexandria, we move to Jamal O'Shale in Suez, where Jamal was telling us earlier the military is out in force now. How have they been greeted?
Yes, indeed, Kamal. We haven't yet reached to where their destination is, which is the center of town. But I can tell you, shortly after they came, and they came on the main road which goes from the Suez to Cairo, this road now is deserted. It has been very busy over the past few days, cars going and coming throughout the day and night. Now this road is completely deserted. There isn't a sound or a vehicle in sight. As I mentioned to you earlier, 5 tanks followed by several armored vehicles which carry military personnel rolled into the city. Really unprecedented scenes here. This was after dozens of riot police armored vehicles were set ablaze. Some exploded, others were toppled onto their side. 2 police stations, including the main police station here in Suez, were set ablaze, and 1 protester was killed. So the army has been brought in. We are on our way now to find out exactly how they will be greeted. But you have to understand the situation here in Suez is extremely personal. For the 4 of their residents or their locals have been killed is not an easy matter, and that they refuse to leave the streets despite the curfew until and unless President Mubarak leaves the country.
Thank you for that update, Jamal O'Shale on the line from Suez. These are the live pictures from Cairo as the ruling party, the NDP, the building of the ruling party, burns in the Cairo night, along with a personnel carrier on the banks of the river. We want to just get a bit of analysis now. We've got guests standing by here in Doha and in London. I'm going to start with Fawaz Gerges, Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics. Thank you for coming in on what's turning into, Mr. Gerges, a quite historic day. What's your reaction to what we see right now?
Well, the situation is really much more volatile than we had expected. I think what you have now is that a grand coalition, a rainbow coalition of opposition forces. You're talking about different social constituencies. You're talking about young men and women, centrists, liberal-minded. You're talking about socialist, secular, liberal movements. You're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood, the most powerful religiously based Islamist movement. This is a very, very serious coalition, and what we have seen in the last 4 days testifies to the intensity of the crisis. I think we might be witnessing the beginning of the end as opposed to the end, the beginning of the end of the Egyptian regime, in particular if the protest continues in the next few days.
Mr. Gerges, I'll come back to you in a moment. Nabila Ramdani also with us in our London Broadcast Centre, an expert on North African affairs. I spoke to you a few days ago probably on what was happening in Tunisia. Did you ever think you'd see this happen in Egypt?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
I was just saying, I spoke to you only probably a week ago talking about Tunisia. Did you ever think what we saw there, that level of protest, you'd see happening in a place like Egypt?
Well, there is definitely, inspiration in Egypt from what happened in Tunisia. But we should bear in mind that, things have escalated here in Egypt. We should keep things in perspective, though, because what happened in Tunisia is really a full-scale revolution, whereas here we're witnessing probably hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets in a very violent way, I have to say. But still, we need to keep things into perspective, because we're talking of a population in Egypt which is more than clearly taking off. We've seen, as the day unfolded, that we went from relatively peaceful demonstrations to extraordinarily violent clashes between the police and now the army and demonstrators. And both sides are very determined to stick to their guns.
So Nabila Ramdani says some perspective needed there, that there was a full-scale revolution in Tunisia, and perhaps this isn't yet. Fawaz Gerges, if I go back to you in our other London studio, how far off a full-scale revolution is this, especially for Egypt, when something like the ruling party building has been set on fire? Can't be far off.
Well, I mean, remember, this is the beginning. The situation is extremely in flux, in fluidity. Obviously, the Egyptian regime has decided to crack down very hard on the protesters, but the protesters and the popular uprising is much more deeply entrenched than we think. I think the most important point to keep in mind is that the barrier of fear has collapsed, has fallen. Egyptians now are no longer terrified of the security apparatus as they used to be. In the last few days, we have seen tens of thousands of Egyptians on the streets. They are determined to basically call for change. And I think the point to keep in mind is that I would argue the military is the key. The military, the senior echelon within the military are watching what's happening very carefully. And remember, in Tunisia, what made the difference was that the military basically made up its mind and told the Tunisian former president Ben Ali to pack and leave. We have to keep our eyes very clearly on the Egyptian military in the next few days.
Mr. Gerges, Mr. Ramdani, stay with me, please. I want to get a live update from Cairo. The situation still carrying on there. Ayman.
All right, Kamal, well, what you're seeing there on your screen are the grounds of the National Democratic Party headquarters. It is a compound that consists of several buildings, an auditorium, a conference hall, a very iconic building on the heart of the Corniche, in the heart of Cairo, rather. And that building now is completely on fire, as you can see from those pictures. A great fear to point out. Just on the other side of it, adjacent to it, is Egypt's National Museum, home of some of the world's most iconic historic pharaonic artifacts. So there's a great deal of fear that if that fire is not put out in the coming hours, indeed it could spread. We have not seen anyone in terms of fire services or other security services near that building trying to put it out or trying to really suppress the crowds. The crowds, for the most part, from where we are seeing, they're walking around very casually. As I was saying earlier, the police has completely almost melted away. I cannot see a policeman or a police vehicle to save my life anywhere from the vicinity of where we are. What we are hearing every once in a while, those very loud explosions, that heavy armored gunfire, and we believe that to be from the direction of the Ministry of Information and the Radio and Television building, also adjacent to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like that one that you just heard right there. I cannot confirm whether those are live ammunitions, but from the sound of it, and I've heard some ammunition in my lifetime, and I can say that is pretty heavy gunfire that we're hearing. We don't know what it's being shot at or in what direction, but the situation here remains very chaotic. It does not seem whatsoever that the protesters have given up any ground throughout the course of the evening, particularly here in the heart. And what I can tell you, and I'm going to have my cameraman just pan down to this image, once again we are seeing the protesters lining up for evening prayers. This is the last prayer of the day that is scheduled. We are seeing them now lining up. They're about to begin prostration. So I can say also what hasn't been heard, and I'm just going to let you hear the sound for a second, if you can, just come on.
Not sure we can quite pick up that audio, but certainly the loud explosion we could get.
Of all of the explosions and the gunfire that you're hearing, it is very unbelievable to see the protesters completely stop in a moment of silence and prayer. And you can see there are at least 5 or 6 rows, about 150 so protesters that are performing the last and final evening prayer of the day. Amidst all of that, the dark cloud of smoke that is emanating from the National Democratic Party headquarters that has now been set on blaze. In the backdrop, you're hearing the sounds of gunfire from the direction, as I was saying, the radio and television buildings. So these are very historic images that you are now seeing and hearing on Al Jazeera.
Ayman, staying on your pitch.